Hello, this is Angela, one of the hosts of Journeys of Hope, and I'm standing here on the grounds of Pilgrim Center of Hope. Guiding people on journeys of hope is our passion, and as a nonprofit organization, we couldn't do it without you. Today, I'd like to thank our generous sponsor who made this podcast possible, in honor of Valentin, Nicholas, and Francisco Campos.
Journeys of Hope, an introduction to the Universal Church that promotes an attitude of pilgrimage among the faithful by introducing you to pilgrim destinations around the world. Welcome to Journeys of Hope, your spiritual passport to pilgrim destinations, placing you in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, the apostles, and the saints. By placing you at these locales and exploring the Christian pilgrimage experience, we hope to define what our daily lives as Catholics are called to be. I'm Robert Rodriguez, Public Relations and Outreach Assistant at Pilgrim Center of Hope.
And I'm Angela Sealana, Media Coordinator at PCH. Welcome to our program. Journeys of Hope is a new weekly series produced by Pilgrim Center of Hope, a ministry that's been guiding people to Christ for over 25 years. And we invite you to visit us at Pilgrim Center of Hope. We are located in Northwest San Antonio. Our website will give you a good introduction of our ministry. That is pilgrimcenterofhope.org. And Journeys of Hope is a new weekly series that not only brings you to international holy sites and shrines around the world, but today's episode, we are delving into one of the local sites. Today, we will take you to a local pilgrim journey to the second oldest parish in San Antonio outside the old Spanish missions, a downtown landmark and spiritual oasis on the banks of the San Antonio River.
Yes, I'm particularly excited about doing this particular local pilgrimage because it is not only is it a beautiful church, but it's a church that I have deep, long-standing connections with, and we'll get into that as we get further into the program. But we are, of course, talking about St. Mary's Church downtown. A lot of people, because we said second oldest, so there's also San Fernando Cathedral, and we'll also talk more about that a little bit later. But yes, St. Mary's Church has been longer probably than most people realized. It was established in the 1850s, and that was to handle the overflow from San Fernando Cathedral, which actually is not but about 4-5 blocks away. So they're actually quite close to each other. So San Fernando Cathedral was there to accommodate immigrants who spoke primarily Spanish, right? And so more and more you had immigrants from Ireland and Germany moving into the area, as well as from the eastern United States. And they wanted masses in English and in German. So all the more reason that St. Mary's Parish was established. And so St. Mary's Church then was placed there, and today it is an official Texas historical site and one of what are known as the painted churches of Texas, of which there are 20. The term painted churches has to do with the interior of the church, which we'll also get into more as we move through the program, which makes the interior unique and that much more amazing to see. Today, there are about 300 families in St. Mary's Parish, and those numbers have dwindled from what were more like about 800 or so families back in the days when it was a thriving parish. The numbers, of course, have dwindled because the city has grown considerably over the years, more movement to the suburbs, and of course, there are many new parishes out beyond 410, beyond 1604 of the city of San Antonio. But the mission remains the same at St. Mary's downtown, and that is to serve the spiritual needs of those in the downtown area, the many tourists that come into the city, and the homeless community that also is there throughout downtown. Many people who work downtown also take advantage of the fact that there is a noon Mass every day. There are confessions every day just before Mass. So during the work days, a lot of the business community is there at St. Mary's. And then there are nearby, the older hospitals are close by. So the priests there at St. Mary's, as well as those that do the ministry to the sick, go to the area hospitals and also to the nearby nursing homes. So everyone in the downtown area, a lot of folks served by St. Mary's Church. Going into the history of St. Mary's a little bit more, in 1856, the land where the church currently is and the rectory as well was purchased from a Spanish land grant of a gentleman by the name of Ambrosio Rodriguez, and ground was broken for what would become St. Mary's Church. The original church was completed in 1857, and that church was done in a Gothic style. Right behind the church, and it's a beautiful old hotel today called La Mansión, but it is, white stucco building, beautiful arches, kind of done in a Spanish style. So this building was built on what is called College Street, right behind the church, and was then called St. Mary's College. That college would actually become what is today St. Mary's University. Angela, you have a connection there.
Yes, my alma mater. And at that time, it was serving only men.
Yes, that's correct. Like many of the Catholic universities as you go back before they became co-ed. Mm-hmm. So interestingly enough, up until the 1960s, the St. Mary's Law School was actually housed there even when St. Mary's University campus was established where it is today. The law school was there up until, 60 years ago, 50 years ago. Also, there's a connection here with, as we talk about Catholic schools, all young men's high school. Many people are familiar with Central Catholic High School. So there is a connection here because the beginnings of Central Catholic High School occurred here on these grounds as not only did we have the church, but we had a grade school and a high school. And so, yes, therefore, there was that connection to the Marianists. But then later on, in January of 1884, the care of St. Mary's was transferred to the Missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate, and the Oblates, or the OMIs, continue to manage and minister at the parish. One of our good friends who is involved with our media productions, Father Ed Hoff, continues to be there. He was at one time the pastor, now he's the parochial vicar there. Father
Yes.
Ed, of course, oblate priest. And yes, they've provided spiritual direction there for almost 135 years. So, yes, love the church, love the oblates, and, that property back then, again, because it was in the heart of the city, grew for a considerable amount of time over the years, and especially back in those early days. So in the early 1900s, at the time that the parish was expanding, and of course many of these families lived in the area, they had young children. So back in 1910, they actually opened an elementary school, which was across the street, across what is St. Mary's Street from the church. And from the very beginning, it was staffed by Sisters of Divine Providence. Sisters of Divine Providence, a lot of people might know of them also in relation to Our Lady of the Lake University.
Right.
We had, I can remember all the sisters that taught me when I was there as a student. They were Sisters of Divine Providence. So St. Mary's downtown was actually one of the first parochial schools in Texas, and initially it was tuition free. And so what an opportunity for kids to be able to receive this Catholic education free of charge, and with the Sisters of Divine Providence doing the teaching. And the land where the school had been was donated by a wealthy businessman from Ireland to the Archdiocese of San Antonio. Unfortunately, the school eventually closed in 2004, it was raised, and there is now a Marriott Hotel on the site of the school. Yes, I was actually a student there from 1970 to 1976.
So you can give us some insight into the history of what that school was like.
Yes, and it was just so unique to be going to school in the center of downtown, but it also is why I remain connected to St. Mary's Church, because as a student, we would attend Mass weekly and got to know many of the oblate priests back in that time. Of course, they would celebrate Mass and they would hear our confessions. They would come to speak to us at the school. Also interesting was that for those days when there was inclement weather, there was an underground tunnel that connected the school to the church. So we would use that tunnel if it was really cold or it was raining outside to get to the church. So that was quite something. But the school was very compact. So it was, multiple floors. There was a gym, and the primary levels were in a basement. And then the second floor was where all our classrooms were at. Above that, there was a rooftop playground. So our playground was actually on top of this building with a high fence. And then the sisters had, at the back end of that roof, was another smaller building where they actually lived. So
everything was right there in that kind of community of St. Mary's.
Very, very much so, because you had, the sisters residing there, you had the school, and then you had the church right across the street, the rectory next to that, where all the oblate priests lived. So, yes, the community there, and then, you've got all these neighborhoods that continue to thrive, like the King William neighborhood and others, where, yes, you had people in close proximity who then, just traveled 10 blocks to get there. And so, very much, for me, the heart of downtown, and so I still look at that parish that way. It's interesting that today that hotel has up on its second floor in old trophy cases memorabilia from the school, and they even named some of their meeting rooms after some of the founding nuns and priests that helped to establish St. Mary's. So there, if people want to go take a look, or if anybody who went to St. Mary's School wants to reminisce and go down memory lane, they can go up to the second floor of that Marriott Hotel and see all these old yearbooks and old trophies and old photographs of students and the faculty.
Wow, many historical treasures.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you mentioned the church itself earlier when we were talking about, of course, we're on a journey of hope. So getting back to the church, the pilgrimage portion of this, the church itself, we talked about the original church being different from the church we know today. And that's because of the historic San Antonio flood in 1921 that we hear about whenever we take the river tour downtown on the river barges, and we see those different gates and systems, the locks that...
Yeah, I mean, so much. Of course, they've done so much to prevent that from ever happening again. But yes, back in that time, there was always that threat if we had heavy rains that downtown was going to flood.
Right, and so that happened. It was the Church of St. Mary's was severely damaged by the flood, but the parishioners were determined to rebuild. And so in 1923, 2 years later, the cornerstone for the new church was laid, and then church services began the following year in 1924. So, of course, as a precaution to prevent future flooding, the new church was placed on higher ground with 15 steps leading up to the front doors. So the church we know today was, as St. Mary's Downtown, was designed by architect F.B. Gainsland, who also designed the well-known Mother House Chapel at University of the Incarnate Word, with which you're familiar as well, Robert.
Well, right, and interestingly enough, that chapel is also built higher above ground. There are multiple steps in order to get to what is the ground level of the Mother House Chapel.
Right.
I had the opportunity a few years back to be working with the Village of Incarnate Word, which is a senior community, which is actually in the convent, it began as what was the convent where the sisters lived and where they retired to, which is actually connected to the Mother House Chapel.
Right, and so F.B. Gainsland designed both of those places of worship, and he designed St. Mary's downtown with an Italian flair in a neo-Romanesque style. So when we look at the cornerstone of St. Mary's, it's located at the corner of St. Mary's Street and College Street. And in Latin, we see two different descriptions of the church. First, we see Sanctae Mariae Ecclesiae, which means Church of St. Mary. Next, we see Domus Dei et Porta Caeli, which means House of God and Gate or Portal to Heaven. So how beautiful to view your church as a portal to heaven.
Definitely, and as we get more into this, it kind of opens the way to talk about not only what St. Mary symbolizes, but all churches when we talk about our Catholic faith.
Absolutely. And looking further at the church exterior, we see some tan brick and smooth stone blocks decorated with rounded arches. There are two identical bell towers. They're 4 stories high, and the building facade itself is 3 stories tall. Above the main entrance is a round Gothic-style rose or wheel window, and above that, a niche with a white statue of Mary, of course, the patroness of the church. The tracery or spokes are meant to outline what are the petals of an unfolding rosebud. And of course, we've talked about flower symbols before here on Journeys of Hope, and that Marian symbol of the rose is a symbol for purity.
Exactly.
So we look to the right of the church building, and closest to the San Antonio River, we see the parish rectory and also a small parking lot that accommodates about 15 cars. In front of that rectory, we see something extraordinary. A life-size bronze sculpture of a man covered in a blanket lying on a park bench. And we only see the feet of the man exposed. So if we look closely, we see that the feet bear the nail wounds of Christ. And there's a plaque posted over the statue which reads, "Homeless Jesus," along with a quote from Matthew 25:40, which says, "In truth I tell you, insofar as you did this for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did it to me." So, Robert, what was your impression the first time you saw that sculpture?
So, for me, because of having a connection that goes back to the 70s, it obviously wasn't there when I was young, but in my adulthood, as I came back to downtown and would go to the noon mass, I remember the first time I saw that, especially because downtown San Antonio, you do have a lot of the homeless population in and around there, and many times in doorways or just there on the street. So when I saw that, because it is life-size, it was just very powerful. One, at first, seeing a man covered in a blanket, I thought, it just represents a homeless person. But then the closer I looked, when I saw the stigmata and the wounds of Christ on the feet, yes, it really gave me all the more reason to be more focused on helping those in need, helping the homeless. But an emotional moment for sure.
It's I was looking into the background of the sculpture, and it was actually created by Canadian sculptor Timothy Shawls, and it can also be seen in a couple other places in the United States. So we have it located at the Catholic Charities of Chicago office and also the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., and both of those places have this bronze sculpture. So we are privileged in San Antonio to have one of these. As well, on the Via della Conciliazione, which is in Vatican City, right outside of St. Peter's Basilica, we have the sculpture as well, and it's located right outside of the Papal Office of Charities. and it was installed there in 2016.
Yeah, this was part of your research that you contributed to all of this. And when I first read this, I was unaware. So to think that we have these connections all the way to the Vatican, and then as you're about to reveal, even to Pope Francis. So.
Yeah, so the sculptor actually gave a smaller version of this sculpture to Pope Francis. So imagine when you see it, as you go visit St. Mary's downtown, imagine actually looking at this, and Pope Francis is also possibly looking at it at the same moment. Who knows? Yeah,
people definitely need to, if they're going to go to St. Mary's downtown, arrive a little earlier. Then they need to be there so that they can have the opportunity to look at this. It's more in front of the rectory than in front of the church, but they'll see it because it's there it is in life size.
Yeah, and as you said, it reminds us that the parish does serve and minister to the homeless there. The parish collects donations for Christian Assistance Ministries and also San Antonio Metropolitan Ministries, of course, Cam and Sam, as we know them, and the parishioners volunteer at the shelters in the downtown area.
Recently I saw in the national news how churches on the West Coast had opened their doors during the wintertime especially, and there were homeless people sleeping in the pews. I have actually been familiar with times over the years when that has been the case there at St. Mary's, that whether the temperature dips below freezing, and they'll do similar things and have also taken care of people in the basement of the church. So definitely living this mission to serve the homeless of our community.
Absolutely. I remember going to Mass nearby at San Fernando and encountering a homeless person that I spoke with briefly, and she was telling me that sometimes the only food she has in the day is Holy Communion. And so how important it is that St. Mary's is there to offer further services for the homeless community.
Yeah, the parishioners I know there, because I'm a parishioner there as well. That's a big focus of, I think, what all the parishioners, maybe what actually may draw them to St. Mary's, and always there to assist those homeless people.
Beautiful. So now that we've talked about the exterior of this beautiful church, can we walk inside now?
Yes, let's go ahead and walk inside, because this is, the facade is quite something to see, but to step inside St. Mary's, it is spectacular. I'm going to use that word. It's quite something to see. Yes, as you walk up, we mentioned earlier, there are 15 steps. There are actually 3 entry points. There are the main entry in the middle, and then there are 2 side entries flanking the main entryway. As you step in, so the stairway wells are covered, so whether you can consider that kind of a porch or a portico, there is that place to kind of come in from out of the elements before you step into the doors. Once you step inside, really, there's not, like in many churches, a full narthex lobby area or a separate space before you step into the church. There's what amounts to the back aisle, and then there you are already in the nave, and you see the pews immediately and the rest of the nave. But it is such a nice, big, expansive space that it takes your breath away, and I've been in there when tourists are coming in and seeing it for the first time, and it's just such a big, beautiful, open space. And we talked about earlier how there's an Italian quality to these spaces that you feel like you're walking into not quite St. Peter's, but maybe a church someplace in Rome near the Vatican.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember the first time I walked into St. Mary's, and I was, as you said, my breath was taken away. Wow. I think that's what a lot of people say when they walk in.
Yeah, so that's, and I think churches, traditional churches are designed in such a way to have that kind of impact on people. A house of God, you talked about what's on the cornerstone.
Well, and the port to heaven.
Yes, exactly. So this space, been talking about the nave itself, which of course is a word, nave, that comes from the word navis, which stands for ship, right? So we know that, and we know that well, too, at Pilgrim Center of Hope, being that our logo is designed of the ship, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But the nave rises to 46 feet. It has a barrel vault ceiling, and it is actually 86 feet in length from the doorway to the communion rail, which leads to the sanctuary. In the center of the ceiling is a large medieval-style chandelier that you might see in an old castle in England, but it is a beautiful center point there hanging above all the pews. The midsection of the church under the barrel roof faces the sanctuary, and the sanctuary is set into an apse with a half dome that is painted in gold. The floors throughout the church are made of onyx. And yes, there's just a very old-world European feel to the entire nave and the inside of the church. The side aisles and pews are separated from the center section by arcades of arches that begin at the transept, which would be where the point of a cross, where the cross beam is. And that's also the crossing aisle of the church. And hanging above the arches are large lantern-style lamps suspended from chains. And yes, to give you an idea of how big of a space this is, there's actually enough seating in the pews for 1,000 people. And then there is a quite large choir loft over the entry doors that can accommodate another 200. And there's a large pipe organ up there. And, of course, then you see the inside of the rose window that we talked about earlier. So it is definitely a grand church, very much steeped in the traditions of the Catholic faith, and impressive stained glass throughout, statuary, painted walls, and arches done in beautiful stencil. So much to see, so much detail.
Right, and you were talking about the different sections of the church. And I do want to sort of appetize our listeners to tune in a couple weeks. We're going to be talking about the symbolism of the different parts of the church so that you can make a pilgrimage to your own church and understand. But talking about the gold apse over the sanctuary where the altar is, that's symbolizing heaven, that part of the church. So just to give you a little nugget.
A taste of an upcoming episode of Journeys of Hope. So that's to come, and we're coming up on a break here during this episode of Journeys of Hope. So we're going to be talking more about St. Mary's Church in downtown San Antonio, and we're going to get more descriptive when it comes to everything from the stained glass to the statuary to the side altars to even then talking about what's up on the sanctuary, but all the symbolism and all the beauty that there is to see at St. Mary's Church downtown. You're listening to Journeys of Hope, a production of Pilgrim Center of Hope. I'm Robert Rodriguez here with Angela Sealana. We'll be right back after this break.
Welcome back to Journeys of Hope. We are here talking about St. Mary's downtown, making a pilgrimage virtually through the gift of sound waves over the radio. And my name is Angela Sealana. I'm joined here with Robert Rodriguez.
Yes, great to be here and glad you're listening.
Yes, we are with Pilgrim Center of Hope, guiding people to Christ since 1993, based here in San Antonio. And so we are guiding you on this pilgrimage to encounter Christ through the journey of St. Mary's downtown. We've just talked about the exterior, and we're getting into the interior now, the symbolism, the statuary, the stained glass, all of the beautiful, deep meanings, the rich meaning of St. Mary's interior. So let's talk about the sanctuary that we touched on before the break. The arch over the sanctuary is very prominent, but I think many people may have missed the message that is written on the arch itself.
It's up high, so that's probably another reason you kind of really have to tilt your head up and look up to the sky to see it.
And that message is, the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Of course, referring to the incarnation, the birth of Jesus, but also because it is over the sanctuary, it's indicating to us that Christ is becoming flesh for us in the Eucharist.
Yes, and they have a noon mass there, which makes me think of, before every noon mass, they pray the Angelus, and this is part of the Angelus as well.
Beautiful. The also on the arch, you can notice grapevines, and they're almost dropping into a chalice, and so that is also reminiscent of the Eucharist, the wine that is consecrated to become the blood of Christ. So we see the white Carrara marble altar, the Loretos behind the altar, and a praying statue of the Virgin Mary over the altar. And we see there with her as well, and a message in Latin. It says, "In matrem semper habebunt," which means, "In Mary you always have a mother." Beautiful message about the patroness of St. Mary's downtown. The tabernacle is made of white Carrara marble as well. It is to the left of the main altar. And then we see St. Joseph altar with a black octagonal onyx marble baptismal font at the right. St. Joseph being a patron saint of the church, of the Universal Church, but also there's great devotion to St. Joseph among the German people, as well as the Irish people and the French people. So we see those different influences of the original church immigrants.
As you mentioned that, not long after St. Mary's was established, the German community eventually established their own parish downtown, which is in fact called St. Joseph's Church. So
that's right.
Yeah.
So we see, of course, in the sanctuary, the ambo, and the ambo is that place where the scriptures are proclaimed, and that is also made of white marble, and it's rising about 5 feet off the ground, so symbolizing the prophetic message of these scriptures.
Exactly, and before I get into, because I'm about to describe the stained glass, but you mentioned the Loreto behind the main altar, and what's interesting there is that there's almost a reference to St. Peter's Basilica in that over the tabernacle that at one time had the Blessed Sacrament, that's part of that Loreto, there are 4 pillars and then a dome that looks a lot like the dome from St. Peter's Basilica, and that rises to a point where it ends up with a cross on the top of it, just below where that beautiful statue of Blessed Mother is, right over that. So, yes, this is, there's so much beauty, and that Carrara Italian marble is, again, it takes you to maybe someplace in Italy and reminds you of all those, the churches that you would find in and around the Vatican. What has always impressed me, it impressed me as a 12-year-old, and it still impresses me every time I walk into St. Mary's, is the amazing stained glass that is throughout. And as someone who loves the Rosary, what's even more powerful about these stained glass windows is that they are related to the mysteries of the Rosary. The other thing to mention, because we made reference to the Mother House Chapel at Incarnate Word earlier, is when I've looked at these stained glass windows, they very much resemble in the colors and in the just the way the lead is used, and the way the designs are done. I see some similarities with the windows here and those at the Incarnate Word Mother House Chapel, as well as the stained glass windows at the Basilica of the Little Flower. In researching this show, I could not definitely confirm that they're made by the same company, but I have my suspicions that maybe they were, especially since we have the architect from the Mother House being the architect here at St. Mary's. So there's a company out of St. Louis called the Emil Frey Stained Glass Company that did those windows. I will continue my search to see if, in fact, they did these at St. Mary's. So news to come. Maybe we can put that out on the website in the future.
Sure, and that would be pilgrimcenterofhope.org.
Exactly. So just as we look at the specific stained glass panels throughout the nave, along the north wall of the nave are the windows, and so you have each of the mysteries in each, they're 20-foot tall windows that are about 8 foot wide. So you have the sorrowful mysteries along the north wall, and then the opposite wall, the south wall, which would be closest to the San Antonio River, you have the glorious mysteries, and then in the apse in the sanctuary, you have the joyful mysteries. And what's interesting here is back when the church was built, we did not have the luminous mysteries, which St. Pope John Paul II introduced, but you have almost a reference to the luminous mysteries in that there are 6 windows in the apse, and in the 6th position, after the last joyful mystery, they have a window with the Transfiguration, which is one of the luminous mysteries. So I just today find that interesting that there was almost a foreshadowing of the luminous mysteries. But yes, the colors in these windows, especially when you have the sun passing through them, are just so rich. And then you have a lot of floral patterns in and around each of these scenes. Those alone, you could spend hours just, standing in front of each of those windows and taking them in, because they depict, there's almost emotion in, as you look at these windows, in what's happening at each of those scenes, whether it's, at the scourging or at the crucifixion. The windows of the glorious mysteries are also quite powerful. Christ descending, the crowning of Mary in heaven. Everything about them is done exquisitely. So, this is what you have to look at as you're sitting in the pews of St. Mary's Church, and to reflect on and to put you in the right frame of mind when you're going there to celebrate Mass. And so then once you're in the nave, and if you were to look back towards the entrance, towards the rear of the church or the entry of the church, you have more stained glass windows, and you actually have separate windows of all the 4 evangelists that are separated into 2 areas. So I'll start by describing what's in the cry room. In the cry room, you'll have the evangelist St. Luke and St. John. And then also in that space, you have stained glass windows of St. Lucy, St. Aloysius Gonzaga, St. Catherine of Siena, and St. Elizabeth, who, of course, our Blessed Mother went to visit as part of the visitation. Also in the cry room, and I think these have been added later because it was not always the cry room, but probably somewhere in about, I'm thinking the 1950s, 1960s, they added these pictures. And they're beautiful pictures of Jesus both as an infant and also as a young child. And then a little bit larger than life image of Christ holding a young child. So, for today, if families are in there with their young children, very appropriate and perfect for those little children to be looking at. So then as you step out of the cry room, painted over those cry room doors, painted in an arch on the wall, are the words, "Behold thy mother," which of course comes from John 19, verses 26 and 27. We referenced earlier in the first segment how the mission of St. Mary's, a big part of it is to take care of the poor. We talked about the statue of Christ under a blanket with the stigmata wounds, a sculpture that is outside the church. So over those entry doorways is another beautiful stained glass window, and that has the motto of the Missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate written in Latin, along with their standard symbol that is part of their crest. And the Latin words translates to, "He has sent me to evangelize the poor are evangelized." So, all these years, over 100 years after that parish was established, they continue to do that mission and do it very well.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for walking us through the stained glass.
Sure.
The statuary now we'll get into. Also some beautiful statuary in St. Mary's downtown. First of all, the Stations of the Cross along the sides of the church are reliefs, and they are depicting the Passion of Christ, of course. They're hand-painted, and they have really vibrant color, very great detail as well. The Seven Sorrows of Mary are also reliefs hung above the confessionals on either side of the nave, and those are cast in white plaster. So, of course, talking about the Seven Sorrows of Mary, we've mentioned them on a previous episode of Journeys of Hope. And if you would like to learn more about those, we invite you to go check out our episode on Mission Concepcion.
Exactly. Go to our archive at pilgrimcenterofhope.org.
So the Seven Sorrows of Mary are there. We have the statue of Our Lady over the main altar, and she's life-size, and she has her hands clasped in prayer looking up to the heavens, as we know. To the left of the main altar is the crucifix, and it's Christ on the cross made of white stone. Then we have several niches and several different patron saints at the front of the church. So we have flanking the main altar some life-size white stone statues. First, we see the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Then we see St. Patrick. And undoubtedly, to me, with my Irish heritage, I know that the Sacred Heart of Jesus is very popular in Ireland, of course, as well as St. Patrick. So again, going back to those Irish roots of St. Mary's. We also see close to St. Patrick's statue, a statue of a young man, and he has an eagle at his feet.
Yes. Tell us about the symbolism of that.
Well, St. John the Evangelist is this young man. So if we recall that St. John wrote what we consider the fourth account of the gospel, and he also wrote some letters in our New Testament as well. He was the youngest, traditionally, of the apostles, and he wrote the gospel of St. John is very different from the other three gospels. We know that the three gospels that are first in the New Testament are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right? And those are called the synoptic gospels.
Yes. They all have a similar perspective, yeah.
Yeah, so they were all reaching a different audience, but so they differ in some ways, but are essentially very similar in that they're more narrative. Whereas St. John's Gospel does have some narrative elements, but it's a lot more symbolism, a lot more of themes. He talks about the signs of Jesus instead of miracles. So signs of Jesus and Jesus being his divinity. So when we see that eagle, that's representing the divinity, the high-flying, soaring Christ that is depicted in St. John's Gospel. All right, so then we also know that St. John, of course, was the apostle that took Mary into his home. As I know you know very well, Robert, because you have St. John on the door of your office.
Right, he's the patron of my office, exactly.
So he is, of course, very important to this St. Mary's Church. Then close to the Sacred Heart statue, we have another statue, and it is of Our Lady, but it's a special statue to us at Pilgrim Center of Hope because of a connection that we have to that. So this is a statue of Our Lady of Grace, and she is looking down with a kind face, and she has her hands open as if she is allowing grace to flow through her to us.
It's very lifelike. I've been in one of the pews right in front of that statue, and I'd like to go early because, in fact, that's placed right in between where the tabernacle is, where the Blessed Sacrament is, and where the altar is. But I want to say the eyes appear to be like glass, made out of glass. So there's something very realistic about looking at that face of that statue.
Well, she was actually a gift to St. Mary's from several pilgrims who had gone on pilgrimage with our Pilgrim Center of Hope founders, Deacon Tom and Mary Jane Fox, who are experts at giving pilgrimages. And the parishioners were inspired to chip in together and donate this statue to St. Mary's Church. St. Mary's Church is the home of the Marian Center of San Antonio that participates in many different Marian activities promoting Marian devotion. And they actually also co-organized with Deacon Tom and Mary Jane Fox the National Marian Conferences that were held in San Antonio.
Yes, you mentioned that, and they, in fact, recently, within this past year, had a gathering of Society of Mary from throughout this region. They had a special mass there that was celebrated by Archbishop Gustavo Garcia Sierra. So definitely a focal point, whether for Marian conferences or for Society of Mary as well.
Very fittingly. So continuing with the sculptures there, to the far left of the main altar, along the north wall, is a replica of the Pietà. And that is the sculpture capturing the moment when Mary holds the lifeless body of Jesus after it's taken down from the cross. And so the Pietà at St. Mary's is actually painted, which the original sculpture by Michelangelo is simply stone.
Right.
But this one has the lifelike colors on them. So what is it like standing in front of that statue?
Well, see, there you go. Knowing that, the original is just the marble or monochrome, I mean, this brings that moment to life that much more because you're seeing all aspects. And, of course, you're seeing all the wounds, the blood of Christ that was, would have been present there. And there's just something about also, because it is painted, you see the pain in Mary's face that much more evident and that much more, impactful because it all looks so real.
Well, we mentioned, speaking of paint, that St. Mary's is one of the 20 painted churches of Texas, and there are only 2 within the city of San Antonio proper. That is St. Mary's downtown, as well as the Immaculate Heart of Mary Church that is located pretty close to Market Square on Santa Rosa Street. Most of the other painted churches are in the Hill Country.
Yes, you have to travel outside of the city to see the majority of them, right?
Right. So what does that term painted churches mean? Well, it is the result of the beautiful tradition of the Czech and German settlers who arrived in Texas in the mid to late 1800s. And they painted the walls, the altars, the arches and apses of their parish churches in an ornate style, which helped them look similar to the Gothic churches that they were used to in their homeland. So you really see that evidently because, as we said at the beginning of the program, St. Mary's, you walk in and it just takes your breath away, the ornate detail of these painted decorations.
Well, and there's, like you made a reference to the gold in the domes and the apses, but there's some gold within the designs that we see painted within the apses and the use of the cross symbol, but they're done in such a way that they immediately capture your attention. Yeah.
So before we continue, I do want to mention one more striking statuary detail, and that is the angels. There are these very large angels on either side of the communion rail, which runs the width of the nave itself, and they are holding torch lamps. So there's also on the altar rail, you see at the front of the altar some bronze gates, and it really gives the sense that the sanctuary is representing heaven with these angels there, almost
heavenly gates, or the gateway to heaven.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, those, to mention just a bit more about those statues of the angels. So the lantern part, because it's as if they're holding the torch, but the part where the flame would be is actually their lamps. So they do, are turned on, and so there's actual light coming out of those. So the majority is stone, and then you have, the actual illumination from the lamps.
Wow. Beautiful. Well, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to explore with St. Mary's. So we have so much more to share.
We do. There's, yes, more treasures to talk about. One of those being, so in the entry to the church, what would be the nave, opposite from where the cry room is at, you have another alcove. And within that alcove, and this has been in probably within the last 30 years or so, they added a life-size statue of Our Lady of Lourdes. And she's standing on what is a running fountain. So I think that is very much a reference to the Healing Springs at Massabielle, where she did appear in France, in Lourdes, France. And then, of course, that would not be complete, because it's not really a recreation of the grotto,
right,
but maybe there is reference to it. And then you have at the side Saint Bernadette, to whom Our Lady of Lourdes appeared to, there kneeling in prayer, looking up at the statue as she might have back when the apparitions occurred. So it's definitely a place for people who have devotions to Our Lady of Lourdes. You have this beautiful alcove to step into and to pray in front of Our Lady. Also here, we have more stained glass windows. So we mentioned earlier that two of the other evangelists are in the cry room. So here in this alcove, we have stained glass depicting St. Matthew and St. Mark. And then where Our Lady of Lourdes is, that is flanked by 4 other stained glass windows, kind of 2 on either side of that alcove. You have a stained glass window of the Sacred Heart of Mary, one of St. Teresa of Avila, another of St. Therese, and then one of St. Helen. And then as you would step out of that alcove, painted over that area, painted in an arch, are the words, Behold thy Son. We mentioned earlier that over the cry room we have Behold thy Mother, both from John chapter 19, and again with the theme in St. Mary's being our Blessed Mother, very fitting that we have that reference.
Yeah, and going back to those different saints, we've talked about why are these saints chosen? Sometimes it's because of the patronage of the church. Sometimes it's because of the donors, but ultimately it's a representation of the people of the parish.
Yes.
So that's something to appreciate as we look at these different saints.
Yeah, as you look at all these windows, you'll see, they're were donated in memory of someone, and yes, by a lot of the founding families of St. Mary's Parish. As many churches throughout the area, because again, this is something that was added, eventually will have a statue or painting of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So in fact, they originally had a statue, which below it are areas of many racks of prayer candles. And then eventually they, in recent years, added a kind of a life-size reproduction of the painting of the tilma of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and that's framed, and they placed it on a beautiful sky blue backdrop, and they've affixed they're artificial roses, but they look like roses falling from the sky that surround that image of the tilma. So definitely an area, again, for people who, because our Blessed Mother appeared in various apparitions in various forms, Our Lady of Guadalupe being one of them, to indigenous people in Mexico. So we have an opportunity for people with that devotion to pray there.
Right. And of course, the roses were part of the Guadalupe apparition to Juan Diego,
yes,
right?
The Castilian roses.
The roses, exactly. When he unfurled his tilma, he not only saw the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, but also some roses fell out. And so that's the reference.
Exactly. Additionally, there are 2 small alcoves on either side of the church in the ambulatories, in the outer aisles. And so there's actually a statue of St. Therese closest to the Pieta, and then there close to Our Lady of Guadalupe, there's an alcove with a statue of St. Anthony de Padua. Both have kneelers in front of them, so people can spend a little time for perhaps either praying to the patron of San Antonio, or if they have a devotion to St. Therese, praying before the little flower. Yes, you can go back maybe multiple times to St. Mary's with a different intent and do many pilgrimages related, whether it's to the statuary or to the stained glass. So we invite you to do that and to spend some time at St. Mary's. So both of us being part of the media department at Pilgrim Center of Hope, I think I'm fascinated by a lot of the interesting historical facts that relate to St. Mary's Church and our Archdiocese and even to our Pilgrim Center of Hope ministry. So let's get into some of those. The first of those being that parish or the rectory was actually the site of the first chancery of the Archdiocese of San Antonio. First Bishop of San Antonio, who was the Most Reverend A.D. Pellicer, and this goes back to 1874, he decided to make that rectory his residence, and by default then it was the chancery of the Archdiocese.
And did you know that he actually is buried underneath San Fernando, just a few blocks away?
That, I now you're jogging my memory, but now I'm remembering. So that is quite something.
Yeah, he was actually known to live in poverty. So very closely related to the mission of St. Mary also.
Wow. And now we do a column for the Today's Catholic, which is the paper of the Archdiocese of San Antonio, called Living Catholicism. And as it turns out, the first statewide Catholic newspaper originated here at St. Mary's back in 1891. And back then it was called the Southern Messenger, and that was founded by the then pastor of St. Mary's. And then before that, they had called it the St. Mary's Review, which later became the Alamo Messenger and eventually Today's Catholic. St. Mary's Parish also where the St. Vincent de Paul Society began, and we talked about, the mission to serve the poor. Well, St. Vincent de Paul Society continues to do that in various ways. And then also there's a connection between St. Mary's Church and Our Lady of Grace Parish, which is in the Monte Vista area of San Antonio. Our Lady of Grace was originally a satellite chapel for St. Mary's Parish, and then in 1930 it became Our Lady of Grace. So that all ties back to St. Mary's.
Beautiful.
So fascinating.
Yes.
Now, looking at the clock, it looks like we're coming up on almost the conclusion of this episode of Journeys of Hope. A lot of information. We could have talked a lot more about this topic. But as is tradition, we'll get into the jewel for the journey that we'd like to give you at the end of each program. And the particular jewel for this episode comes from Pope Leo XIII, and it reads, "The rosary is the most excellent form of prayer and the most efficacious means of attaining eternal life. It is the remedy for all our evils, the root of all our blessings. There is no more excellent way of praying." And I chose that because of the fact that with all the stained glass in St. Mary's referring to the rosary, I encourage people to go there with their rosary in hand and utilize the stained glass windows to reflect and meditate on the various mysteries. And now, as is also our tradition, we have a closing prayer that we would like you to pray with us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, our Mother. To thee do we come, before thee we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer us.
Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, that concludes our journey for today. Thank you so much for joining us on Journeys of Hope, and we invite you to come visit Pilgrim Center of Hope and learn about our ministry. Visit us at pilgrimcenterofhope.org or call us if you have any questions, 210-521-3377. Fellow pilgrims, on behalf of Pilgrim Center of Hope, I want to thank you for journeying with us to St. Mary's Church downtown. Because we are pilgrim people, strive to live your journey of hope with boldness, passion, and joy. Until next time, may God bless you. Safe travels.
Journeys of Hope, a production of Pilgrim Center of Hope, guiding people to Christ. Visit our website at pilgrimcenterofhope.org.